Every year on the sacred day of Wistmas, which is opening day at Whistler Bike Park, we run a survey where we see what the people in the lift line are running on their bicycles. We then publish the results in full for all of our readers. Now, typically, year on year, about 50% of the riders are running a Maxxis Assegai DHR2 combination. But why? Why is it? And do the riders risk being underserved when there are more specialist combinations available? Today's video we're creating with support from Maxxis tires, but the information that we'll cover will be similar across many tire brands. For starters, why do riders like the Assegai tire? Well, firstly, it builds upon a very important tire in the legend of mountain biking, and that is the Maxxis Minion, or the DHF. The Minion was famous for its grip and essentially used something like a rail system. As you can imagine, when you lean the bike, you're putting a lot of trust in the inside shoulder of the edge knob. The DHF proved popular because it built on that and added another edge through the middle. Now, long lugs can provide more edge, and therefore, when you're leaning the bike over, it can offer more hold. The problem with this is that it had quite a round profile, and some riders wanted a squared edge to give more support when leaning the bike, instead of feeling like the tire was rolling away from underneath them. The tire's profile, it's a personal thing, and there are still riders out there that prefer a more rounded profile. A lot of riders then started running the DHR, or the downhill rear on the front, just to get a little bit more shoulder. And in some ways, that's how the Assegai was born, by combining the two. It used the profile and element of the tread pattern of the DHR2 with the long center lugs of the DHF, all mixed in with a few extra touches, such as this transfer knob here, which will ease the transition between center and side knobs for support. So, a lot of riders choose to run the DHR2 on the rear for something that clears mud well, offers consistent braking, and rolls a bit quicker, paired with a grippier yet slower rolling Assegai on the front. This is reflected in World Cup racing as well, and when you want something a bit faster, Maxxis riders tend to run double DHR2s, whereas they want something maybe a bit grippier, double Assegais. So, what other options are there, and how much of a difference does it actually make to have the perfect tire for the job? Now, we should start by saying that we're not suggesting swapping your tires for every different ride, or that a set of all-rounders is a bad thing, but rather, if you find that some of the testing today reflects your own experiences, perhaps you'll be more confident in knowing what tire to choose next. In today's experiment, we have 3 distinct setups. We have the High Roller 3 front and rear, which is a cut spike tire offering maximum grip. Now, this tire should give control and confidence when things get loose. Then we have the People's Champion, the Assegai and DHR2 combo. This 1-2 punch should offer the best overall performance, whether going up or down. And then we have something racy, but still not out of place for someone who wants to cover ground and go fast. We're bumping up the DHR2 to the front and bringing a fast rolling tire with a shallower tread to the rear. This will undoubtedly be felt positively when going uphill, but it could be a little bit exciting on the looser parts of the descent. I'll put each of the 3 setups to the test on varied terrain, from loose, steep downhill, a faster downhill section, and then a flatter traversing section of trail as well. First up, loose, steep downhill. Okay, I've made it to the top of the first section of trail, which is the steep, loose downhill. Can confirm it is quite dry out, so it's pretty loose down there. It's a bit of a windy section of trail, and then it hooks into a left-hand corner. So the goal with this experiment is to Test out all the tire combinations, make some notes along the way, see how they perform, and I'm gonna run a couple of timed sections as well. Now it's worth mentioning, just for the record, I am running the exact same wheel combination here and the exact same tire pressures on all of the tires. And for me, that's 19 in the front, 20 in the rear. Whew, out of breath already, but let's drop in. 3, 2, 1, go. Alrighty, so the last section that we just tested wasn't the longest section of trail, but it gave me all the elements that I need to put these tire combinations to the test, and that was a steep, loose, downhill section of trail. We even threw in a nice little left-hander there at the end for good fun. This trail that we're dropping into next is quite different. First of all, it's not as steep. It is still a downhill trail, but I shouldn't need to be riding the brakes quite as hard, and it's a much more hard-packed trail with some corners. So if my hypothesis proves right, I think there will be a bigger difference in the rolling speed overall, but only time will tell. Okay, we've just finished with two very different sections of downhill trails to test on, and so far what I have noticed is that the double high roller combination and then the Assegai DHR2 in the rear combination, they're kind of running neck and neck, especially in terms of brake control and just overall confidence riding the bike in the corners and on the steeps. However, the DHR2 in the front, Forecaster in the rear combo is noticeably faster right off the back. It just feels fast in the corners and in the flats. And let's be honest, it is a fun tire in the rear. It does lack a little bit in terms of the grip and the overall confidence so far, but the next section of trail that we're gonna go test, I think that's where this combo might shine. It's gonna give us an overall view of what these tires are designed for. Okay, I'm coming up on the final testing grounds for today, and it's basically a glorified gravel road, but this can mimic many different trails. Perhaps you've got some smooth flow trails where you live. This would be a great example, or something that's really common where I live, and that is a long, steep Forest Service road in which we use to access the trails. I'm gonna do a bit of an efficiency test here so I can see how each of the tire combinations feels out on a trail like this, but also we're gonna put the timer out. And to keep me honest, I've got the power meter on the bike to make sure that I'm pedaling at a steady cadence, but also power output. So I'm aiming on this climb here about 200 watts, which for me, that's about 85% of my MAP. So it's not an easy gear, but it's also not the hardest. Let's get pedaling. Okay, that was about as much tire testing and tire swapping than one person can possibly handle in a day. That was a lot of information to digest. So I'm gonna look over my notes from all of the different tire combinations and trails that we tested on, and I'll meet you back in the studio for a bit of a debrief. Alrighty, we're back in the studio now, and I've cooled down and looked over a load of notes from a full day out there on trail, comparing 3 different tire combinations on 3 sections of trail. So let's dig into the findings, shall we? Let's start with the loose and steep section of trail. Now, maybe this is something that you're very familiar with at home. You love riding this type of trail. I definitely ride a lot of this trail here in Squamish and Whistler. So let's talk about the first tire combination, which were the double high rollers. Overall, this tire combination felt the most confidence-inspiring and reliable in that I had the most braking control in that steep and loose terrain. The high rollers had the somewhat narrower knobs, but quite a bit taller, and so I could really dig into the ground, and I felt it the most with my rear tire. So as soon as I applied the brakes, I felt like I could basically stop on what felt like a near vertical section of trail. Overall, compared to the other tire combinations, the double high rollers were the slowest, although if you're going to compare confidence to rolling speed, that's your own choice. Moving on to the next set of tires that I compared, and that was the more all-rounder tire combination with an Assegai in the front and a DHR2 in the rear. This set of tires I felt like was also very confidence-inspiring in that I had a lot of the tread on the ground. So I had a lot of contact on the ground, creating more grip, which led to pretty good brake control, especially in that steep terrain. In comparison to the high roller, I would say the high roller dug in a bit more, whereas the ramps on the DHR2 in the rear, they slowed me down, but they kind of let me skid along the straight section of trail. Having the Assegai on the front with the extra transfer knobs as I was cornering in that exit, I felt like I could carry a bit more speed because I just trusted that front tire. Having a lot of weight on the front, especially in that left-hander after the steep and loose section, it just felt really nice. It felt like I knew what was coming, and it felt very trustworthy. And then next up, the DHR2 on the front and the Forecaster on the rear. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it took me a few runs and a few tries just to accept the rear tire and kind of find its limits before I put it to the time test. And what I found was that it didn't have the best braking control in the steep, shooty bits. Now, I think that's to be expected. It's not exactly what the tire was designed for, but what it did do well at was when I had to lean it into the left-hand corner at the bottom of the chute. Again, it took a few tries just to kind of find where that knob was so that I could trust it and then push into it. But overall, super fun tire. When I did accept that it was in the rear, I could just kind of let it buck in some of those straighter, steeper sections and then brace for the corner, knowing that it was gonna hook up when I needed it to. The next section of trail I did the tire comparison on was a fast and hard packed section of trail, something that I love riding and probably a lot of viewers at home love riding too. It reminds me of maybe some bike park features and that they were smooth and fast, maybe even machine built. So this is what I found with the tire combinations, starting with the double high rollers. Overall, this tire combination felt like it rolled the slowest, but it felt very trustworthy, especially in a straight line. Now, the only time I was kind of on the edge with these tires, no pun intended, was when I was going through the corners, and I felt like I was riding those at about 85%. I was a little intimidated to lean the bike as much as I thought I could because the knobs are so tall, but overall, amazing brake control. I felt like I could dump speed in the straight bits before I hit the corners and then exited with speed. Next up, the Assegai and DHR2 combination. Overall, this tire combination felt the most controlled, and I also felt like I could dump speed when I needed to in the straight bits before the corner. And because I really trusted that Assegai in the front with the extra knobs and the rounder profile, I could actually push into the corner and fully commit. So I was able to drop my outside heel, I was able to lift up the inner one, look ahead and drive through the corner a bit more, actually quite a bit more than the other two tire combinations. I think for me, just getting used to that rear tire on the back, knowing that it is gonna get a little bit squirrely on some of the faster sections, but you really have to lean the bike over in order to engage that side knob. So I took a couple of tries at the corners before I put it to the test, and I felt that I got more confident on each run. I kind of felt what point I could lean the bike over and still get some good traction in the corner without feeling like I was just gonna shoot off into the woods off of the berm. Now, getting it to that point where the side knobs could dig into the corner and regain confidence for me as the rider was a little bit intimidating, not gonna lie. And the final section of trail, which was basically a smooth gravel road. However, this can be compared to a load of different trails, perhaps a smooth or undulating trail where you live, or maybe just a long climbing trail. This is what I found. Starting with the double high rollers. Now, I don't think it's any surprise that this was the slowest rolling set of tires out there, which for me was fine, but if you're riding for a long day, that time and energy lost will compound for sure. And then the Assegai DHR2 combo. Now the climbing time for this one was almost identical to the double high rollers, and so even though they performed really well out on descending trails, when it comes to the smoother and undulating terrain, I think that your energy over a long day would definitely be sapped by this tire combination, especially in comparison to the final one, which was by far the fastest on the climbing for the gravel road, and that was the DHR2 and Forecaster. Now, as soon as I looked back at the GoPro footage from the climb and I looked at the timing, it was very obvious that this tire combination was rolling a lot quicker uphill. I was still only pushing 200 watts, just how I did the other tire combinations, but it was quite a bit faster, and over a long day, it just adds up. I mean, 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, that could add up to 30 minutes maybe in a big ride day, and energy that you're being saved. I think especially having that Forecaster in the rear when you're seated and climbing, and that's where your energy is being transferred to that rear tire, it made a huge difference. Now, I know that I was climbing on it, but if you translate that out onto a smoother bit of single track, it's gonna be the same. Your rolling speed is going to be much quicker. Overall, there are many tools to get the job done when biking, be it skills or equipment. However, I hope today's video has armed you with more knowledge and an understanding of the tires you're already running and how they can better suit your terrain or riding style. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel.